So when you complete a sensory assessment, is it always sort of holistically looking at all these different 8 senses in response to your client, or is it always an assessment to do with particular activity that the referral's about?
So first, and I suppose the most important thing is I would never necessarily conduct a sensory assessment. I'm an occupational therapist first and foremost, so I'm going to be completing an occupational therapy assessment. And my colleagues in speech therapy and physiotherapy are also trained SI practitioners. They would be doing their speech and their physio assessments first and foremost. So I would be looking, as all of us would be, at occupational performance. I'll be looking at where those barriers to occupational performance are, and then I'll be asking why. Why is this person experiencing these barriers? Why can't they access their occupation? And then I'd be using my sensory lens as part of maybe one of the tools that I'll be drawing in from. So again, it's really important to, although I believe very strongly in sensory, I think it's really important. It's only part of a person. We've got to consider the whole. So we'll be drawing in from areas from mental health, physical health as well as sensory. So then if I do believe that, okay, for example, why is this student not eating properly? Actually, I think there's a sensory origin. You're right. I may then pick specific sensory assessments. We have standardized sensory assessments that we can use. A lot of them are questionnaire based, which drills down a bit further into the details and can identify maybe key areas of difficulty or the key senses. It give me more information about where that difficulty may be happening. From there, I then may select more targeted activities to drill down. So for example, if I'm assessing a student and I notice that they're very uncoordinated, that they can't, I think the coordination of their mouth is impacting on their eating, their tongue. I think there's a coordination difficulty here. I might do my sensory assessments and it will tell me, okay, maybe there's something wrong with proprioception going on. So then I'd pick specific activities to look at the proprioceptive system. So I would look at a range of motor-based activities. I may be looking at climbing and running and jumping. I'll be looking at how they move their bodies, how they're planning. So I will then pick specific activities I know will show me kind of an insight into what that nervous system may be doing. Yeah.
Thank you. And in terms of interventions that you might provide, obviously this is another huge question in itself. You've mentioned environmental modifications. You mentioned clothing as a difficulty that some people have. With the texture, and I know some people struggle with tight clothing. Labels is another thing, isn't it? And I think was it Marks and Spencer's, amongst others, I imagine, started producing clothing without labels and without internal seams.
Yes. To be more sensory friendly, yes.
Would you use sort of rehabilitation and as such, like gradual exposure? So if someone's struggling, I don't know, with a strong smell of something, that you'd gradually introduce it in small amounts to increase their tolerance?
There's kind of two, I like to say sort of two prongs to sensory intervention. So the first is around supporting reactivity and modulation, a bit like we spoke about before. And we do that through adapting environments, adapting tasks, and providing people with the sensory input we know that will support their regulation in that moment. And by supporting it, PEO model here, really making those environmental change and task changes and activities we know that will support regulation modulation, we can enable people to be successful in that moment. Now, the sensory activities that may regulate and calm you, so you're saying I'm got over responsive to smell, it may be that we don't use smell to calm and regulate you. It may be that we use another sense, such as proprioception, to calm and regulate you. So it may be if you're in a room of bad smells, for want of a better example, you know, the lunch hall or going to the toilet, we might add in some proprioception before or at the time. And therapists will select that because if you're trained in sensory integration and processing, you understand how the different senses integrate and they impact on each other. We know that proprioception, for example, that is your brain's key regulating sense. So if you need to calm or you need to regulate any of the senses, any people, you go for proprioception. So we use that a lot. So there's that, but there's also a treatment protocol called Ayres sensory integration therapy. And this was developed out of the model. And Ayres sensory integration therapy is a manualized protocol where the therapist applies what we call structural and process elements. And the process elements guide us as to what needs to be included within a therapeutic session to produce adaptive responses to the sensory information. So when we're doing Ayres sensory integration therapy, we are targeting those, it's the motor component of sensory. So there's lots of kind of patterns of motor dysfunction that sit on the motor side. And we, through the principles of neuroplasticity, we hypothesize that if we can provide the right sensory input at the right intensity, at the just right level of challenge, with a therapeutic relationship with the therapy that is client-led and based in playfulness, all this comes together to create a foundations where we can generate adaptive responses to the sensory input. And through adaptive responses, we can build skill. So there's two kind of interventions here. There's the intervention where I'm going to support regulation, modulation, and participation in the moment. Absolutely essential. We need to do that for people to be successful at their occupations. Then we also have the Ayres sensory integration therapy, where we're going to hypothesize through the principles of neuroplasticity, we can elicit new adaptive responsive to develop skill and a more appropriate response to sensory input. Now they're two different things. Ayres sensory integration therapy is not right for everyone. It's not everyone with a sensory processing difference will benefit from that. Absolutely not. It's certain patterns that a therapist who's trained in it will say, okay, I think this will support your sensory profile. And again, it's if people want to engage in that, because people may not want to do that. Absolutely, you don't have to. And even that has to be based. So when we do Ayres sensory integration therapy, it looks like, if I'm doing it with kids, for example, it looks like I'm playing with them. Yeah, it doesn't look like I'm working on occupation or function, because actually what I'm doing is I'm targeting intervention at the sensory system level. But even though I'm targeting at the sensory system level, absolutely there still needs to have to have a occupational outcome. There still has to have a functional outcome, and there still has to be goals, functional goals that I'm working towards as well.
And with that,
so we can.
Sorry, go on.
No, I say, and so whatever you choose to do, both or either or, and I could choose to do Ayres sensory integration with another treatment approach. There's another myth out there that says we do this on its own. Absolutely not. So I worked with a lot of your children that fall under the DCD category if they came into the end, developmental coordination disorder. So again, a motor disorder, sorry, a developmental motor praxis and planning difficulty. Now, the evidence tells us absolutely that's treated very successfully with an intervention called co-op, cognitive orientation to occupational performance. Love it as an intervention. That's a top-down model, very successful. But with my sensory lens, I'll be going, oh, yes, but I do recognise, I think there's some sensory underpinning to this motor difficulty. I'm going to do Ayres sensory integration therapy as well. I'm going to be in effect treating the student with a bottom up, targeting the sensory systems, but also with a top down at the same time. The two can work together. There's a myth out there that we get children into a clinic, we swing them from swings, and that's all we do. Absolutely not. And a well-trained sensory practitioner will be using sensory strategies or AIRS sensory integration alongside their other OT toolkit. It's part of that.
And you mentioned proprioception as being quite a common intervention for somebody that would benefit from a calming activity.
Yeah.
What could you talk a bit more about that? So what sort of proprioceptive activities could you offer or suggest?
So proprioception, we generate proprioception when we move our muscles and our joints against resistance. It's active. I have to do it. It's not a passive. I have to actively move. So we get proprioception when we push, we pull, we lift, we carry, we stretch, and we chew. They're the lovely ways that we get proprioception. So anything that involves any of those activities. So push-ups, pull-ups. I get children doing, you can't see me if you're listening to the podcast, but you pushing themselves up in the chair, pulling TheraBands. It's why stress balls work. You're squeezing your muscles against resistance. It's why we chew. Does anyone, especially if you've got children, but you may yourself, when you get anxious or nervous and you start to feel a bit dysregulated, chewing is a great way. We get lovely proprioception by working our jaw against resistance. I have many parents there, they'll come home and their children's like ties have been chewed to death, and you know, their sleeves, or chewing gum. You may, as an adult, I know if I go on a long drive, I have to chew for that sense of proprioception to keep me regulated, to keep me alert. So any activity with resistance, I had when I worked in a special school with my big teens, my strapping teens, my 6'2" teens, the way that they got the resistance against the muscle they needed, I had to put a gym in the school. We were on the row machine, we were on the treadmill, we were lifting weights. That's a resistance that they needed. But yeah, for you in your everyday life, and it'll be things like moving as well, going for a walk. It will be it'd be those activities where you're using your muscles against resistance, again, swimming, riding your bike, pushing the shopping trolley, carrying heavy bags, all those lovely activities. Yeah.
And I often hear about sensory diets. So is this part of the intervention? It's sort of telling someone throughout the day what they can be doing.
Yeah, so sensory diets or sensory strategies, we tend to call them now. That is how, so we, through the assessment, we will identify, okay, according to your unique sensory profile, I think you need, absolutely say throughout the day, you need proprioception because maybe you need to remain regulated throughout the day. So yes, we will look at your timetable, we'll look at your day and we'll say, how can we get more proprioception? Firstly, into activities you do anyway, because that's easier. That's easiest. That's what we should be doing it. How can we get proprioception through activities you enjoy? We really used occupation, meaningful occupation, to try and generate this. So we try and make it second nature. So we'll be looking from the moment you wake up. So again, sorry, I keep going back to children because that's where my head flits to, but absolutely, this is across the ages. So I've got students who will get out of bed, maybe have a jump on a trampet when they wake up to get some proprioception. They'll go downstairs, and for breakfast, very deliberately, they may have cereal without milk on. So it's a crunchy, or they may have an apple for breakfast. So I'm going to give them prop there. They may drink through a straw instead of a cup. So I'm going to feed prop through there. Very deliberately, we may say, okay, you walk to school. I've got a number of children who it's okay for them to school because actually we realize that walking to school is a really important part, that they get that lovely proprioception and vestibular there before they get to the school gate. They may stop. We're very lucky here to have a park next to our school. So I've got a number of students who will stop, go on the monkey bars before they go into school. And then in schools, we look at how can we set up sensory circuits maybe throughout the day. What activities are they doing in break time? So maybe they're not running around the playground just chasing each other. Actually, can they be doing some skipping? Can they be in basketball, football? So what activities can we include? And that is very much, yeah, sensory diet or sensory strategies. We'll be really looking at how can we feed their nervous system with the activities that they need throughout their whole day, but using occupation they're already engaged with or meaningful activities that they're motivated to do. Sounds very OT, right?
It does. It all sounds very specialist. I mean, it's a lot of skills, isn't it? Very specialist area.
I think it's just like any specialist area. It's like, going into neuro or going into orthopedics or mental health. I think any of us who are stepping into that advanced practice field, there is this element of extra learning that we have to engage in, and this extra quest for knowledge. And I think sensory is absolutely the same as that.
And I imagine a lot of your work is also working with the children's parents, with the teachers, support workers, both in terms of making sure the sensory diet's implemented, but also explaining the reasoning behind it. Do you find that parents and staff are generally quite receptive, or can there be some challenges there?
Absolutely. Generally, people are receptive, especially when with adults as well, I find, especially when sensory has been the missing piece. So there's many people we work with who with children, but adults, and for many years they're like something they can't quite put their finger on maybe why they find the environments that they're in so upset and dysregulating. Maybe why can't they wear certain clothes? Why are they maybe clumsy, or why can't they coordinate themselves? And sometimes offering that sensory lens actually gives a lot of answers, and people are very receptive to that. And I think once you get that or that aha moment, they are very then receptive to work with you afterwards. Of course, we are asking people to maybe change practices, especially within education and health, where we've done things the same for a very long time. Education has looked for a long time. Healthcare, wards, they look the same, and we're asking people to change environments and to change practices. And yes, there can be resistance to that because we're asking people to do things a little bit different, and often sometimes quite strange things. They'll be like, well, why will bouncing on a gym ball make that child concentrate for longer? Like, well, I asked you to look at their handwriting. Why are they now on a scooter board in the corridor? Like, sometimes it's really, but you have to take the people on the journey with you, really try to explain why you're doing things, because sometimes it's not obvious. Yeah.
Thank you. And for OTs that want to learn more, what can they do? So both for OTs that just want to read a bit more, learn a bit more, but
Absolutely.
also formal courses.
Yep. So sensory integration education, if you visit our website, we offer, there's lots of reading lists, there's recommendations for books, according to the clinical population that you work with. We've got something for everyone there for where to start your journey. We've got free courses that you can download if you're just exploring this area, absolutely. And we have our lifelong learning package, which is monthly webinars, a forum, and support drop-in sessions. But we also go up to postgraduate level of study if people wish to come and study at that postgraduate level. And I think that people often say, what do we have to do? Obviously, I would advocate for that, for that advanced level of training, because I can see the benefits of that. This is such a big, we're teaching neurology, we're teaching about neuroscience and theories and behavior, and that is a lot. And what I'd say to people is, even if you don't embark on the postgraduate level of training, you need to be guided by someone who can point you in the right direction. Probably like anything you go and study as well. So you're not missing out. So you're not just maybe going to read up about being under and over responsive. Someone's guiding you, okay, go and look at discrimination, go and look at motor. someone who can guide you through that process. We can absolutely support you to do that at whatever stage of learning and wherever you want to go, to whatever level of study. We're here to support that.
Thank you. And is there anything else about sensory integration that you'd like to talk about that we haven't?
Oh, no, I think that it is absolutely, it's been the most practice changing training and practice that I've implemented within my career. Again, I think the opportunity to dispel some myths around the fact that actually, we believe that looking at people with a sensory lens is part of them. We're not, sensory is part of us as a being, fundamental part, but it isn't the only part. And then it is everyone's business, really. It's not just we know sensory to be strongly correlated with autism and ADHD, but actually the figures are 1 in 6 people will have sensory processing differences that will impact on their participation. 1 in 6 is high. So it is everyone's. As an OT, you will encounter people where sensory processing will be impacting on their occupational performance. So please, I'd invite you to consider this in all of your assessments and when you're looking to those barriers to occupation.
Thank you. It's been really interesting speaking with you.
Thank you.